Matthew Kaminski ha sido galardonado además con el premio Overseas Press Club en 2015 por su cobertura del conflicto de Ucrania. Ha sido finalista para el premio Pulitzer en la categoría de comentarista y premiado en 2014 por la German Marshall Foundation por su excelente información sobre asuntos europeos. Creo que es evidente que toda esta experiencia profesional y personal le cualifica especialmente para abordar las cuestiones que planteábamos en el inicio y que seguramente él va a desarrollar en su sesión. Tiene la palabra.
Well, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. And I do want to take to heart the name of this forum, which is a conversation, and have this be a two-way conversation. I will talk at you, and I apologize for that. I apologize for talking at you in English. Unfortunately, I chose French in school to study instead of Spanish, and I've probably regretted it ever since. And when I was told there's going to be a room full of journalists in this room, I thought the most interesting thing for journalists these days, you know, there's Europe's falling apart or not right now, America's falling apart currently. But the most interesting thing for journalists, seems to me, the thing that we're most obsessed about is business and our business. This is a fairly new thing. Reporters didn't really think that much about business. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the media business, where it is now, where it's going, maybe a little bit about the future of media, and then walk you through the case study that I know best, and then open up the floor for a conversation. It's not really fair to say that journalists never thought about their own business very seriously. I just don't think we ever really thought about it the right way. And I speak from personal experience. In the year 2000, the Wall Street Journal, during the first internet boom, didn't have enough pages in its US print run to fit in all the ads that people wanted to put in the paper. So we had to print an extra, or I always have to get rid of that. They had to print an extra section just to fit in all the extra ads for all these great internet stocks. So I, as a reporter, of course, felt very underpaid. You know, this is the way, why am I not getting some of this? And all reporters feel underpaid, and it hasn't changed one bit. But I thought, you know, this is the way it's going to be, and it's going to keep going. Then, of course, the first internet boom busted. The whole thing blew up. Our advertising went through the floor, along with the tech industry. The tech industry kept revived. About, you had 9/11, but it revived. And we all assumed in the print media that our advertising would come back too. Natural things, we just follow the business cycle. That didn't happen. Everyone who is in my generation who had, really tried to get into the top newspapers, this was sort of, if you arrive at one of these places, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, FT, you can imagine you can have a fairly secure and comfortable career for 20, 30 years going forward. So instead, we all saw one after another of layoff rounds. And the conclusion that a lot of journalists drew from that is journalism is dead. No more journalism, there's no money for journalism, and we can't make this work. And what I want to present here to you, first of all, is journalism is not dead. And to understand why journalism is not dead, I think you need to understand how to think in the right way about the media business. This applies if you are a reporter, an editor, I think someone who runs a media company. And the first step to understanding how to think about business the right way, it seems to me, is to a little dose of a bit harsh reality. And I'm going to use the US as an example, since the US has sort of the digital revolution basically kind of like a tsunami, just like swept through the US media scene first. But you're not safe, as you've probably noticed in recent years. What happens there seems to sort of come over the ocean, like the tsunami analogy. It hit in the UK, then it hit in France, in Spain, and across the world. But I will sort of use the US as an example, and a couple of things to be realistic about. newspaper jobs are dying. There was a headline from last year. There's a company called CareerCast, which is a survey done in the US. And the headline was, newspaper reporter is on the list of the most endangered jobs, period, again. And I don't know, how many of you here work for a newspaper? All right, there's a fair number. So you are in the same category as a mail carrier and a farmer as having one of the most endangered jobs. In sheer numbers, the number of jobs in the newsrooms has declined by 60% from 1990 to 2016 in the US. There's something called ASNI, which is an Association of American Newspaper Publishers. They used to do a survey of newsrooms, tallying up how many newsroom jobs there were, and it was sort of it was sort of pretty steady from 1990 until 2006, and a sort of sharp decline from 2006 on. And from 2006, you've had about a 40% decline in jobs. So last year, they decided to stop doing the survey. They just didn't really want to. They didn't really want to know anymore. Now, there's a sliver of good news here. I think as good or bad, but the number of people working in the newspaper industry in the US for the first time last year is lower than people who are working in internet publishing and broadcasting. The number of online publication jobs tripled from 2006 to 16. Now, it tripled from about 3,000 to 10,000, and the total number of newspaper jobs went down from about 56,000 to 20-odd thousand. So a bit like advertising, you have digital jobs picking up, but not enough to make up for the decline in the newspaper jobs. In 2006, there was one digital journalism job for every 10 jobs in newspaper journalism. Last year, that ratio was 1 to 4, so it was one online journalism job versus four newspapers. In America, we have about 1,500 daily newspapers, although that number is also declining, to give you a sense of the scale here. So, here's the harsh truth. The newspaper was a wonderful monopoly. We all profited from it greatly for centuries. We had the control over the means of distribution of information. No one could tell people what was going on, except if it landed or they bought it at their kiosk or it landed on their doorstep. That monopoly is unfortunately over, and that has certain consequences. Now, we all have moved in the media industry. Initially, it was just a sideline, the website. But now, everyone's got a website, and we think about traffic. And we think about traffic as being the same as, circulation. You get a paper that's at a circulation of X. If you can get the same number, relative number Y online, that is the same thing. You can make the same business case work. My other, takeaway is traffic is fool's gold for you. We obsess over it for the wrong reasons. We don't take away the right conclusions from the numbers that we look at. And we project assumptions about our great 19th century business model of the newspaper. To me, the paper is a horse carriage, a wonderful thing in its day, but it has a limited uses today. Now, I would say, so at Politico in the US, we have about 30 million unique users. It's pretty good per month. The New York Times just hit 120 million unique visitors per month. It's now the 32nd biggest website in the US and 123rd in the world. Keep that number in mind. I'm going to come back to it in a bit. That's pretty good, right? Okay. Let's take the New York Times 120 million. Google. Every day, there are 3.5 billion searches carried out on Google. Every day, there are 1.28 billion people go onto their Facebook account, are active on it for an average of 20 to 30 minutes, which I'm pretty sure is longer than most people interact with the New York Times website, by the way. And that's scale. Google, that's a platform. That is big. 120 million, 300 million per month It's tiny compared to this. So if companies think they can be the dominant platforms as a media content company, Facebook and Google have showed you no. You're not going to be that. You're just not going to be. Everyone is, in some sense, a niche player. And that's my... and my last sort of dose of harsh reality would be advertising, media spending. This is a number for the US. It's a big number. Media spending this year is meant to be $206 billion. It's a lot of money. It's up 7% on the year before. Mobile is the main driver of the new spending on digital. Now, print is down. It's been steady down. It's about 5% on average for newspapers, 2% for magazines. But that seems to be okay. But this is what is key. The main driver is, as I mentioned, mobile. It's up for 70% of all digital spending is spending on advertising on your phone. Google controls 40% of that global market. Facebook controls 40% of the display advertising on mobile. And that 3/4 of that digital market is controlled by Google and Facebook, and virtually all new advertising into digital is sucked up by Google and Facebook. It makes you think twice about how much you want to base your business on kind of advertising which is intended for the masses. Lenin famously asked, what is to be done? And I don't want to leave you here on this rainy day in Madrid. I never thought that I'd say that. Feeling too gloomy. And come back to my original contention. The newspaper business is dying. It's not entirely dead, and there is a future for some print. But journalism is not in crisis. And there are ways to make journalism work editorially and as a business. And for journalism to work editorially, it has to work as a business, unless you happen to work for a state-run news agency. But I think even then you have to think about the same things that a private media outlet needs to think about. Now, there are many different models of how people have made it work. And I'm going to talk about sort of mine in some more detail. I would want to mention some others to not give you this assumption that we, in any sense, have all the answers, which we don't, or that our experience has been flawless, which it certainly hasn't, but that there are many different approaches. The one common strain, I would say, between all of them is that you got to be smart, you got to be nimble, you got to be flexible, you got to be open-minded. You have to really think about finding new ways to make this work. If you really care about journalism, and I've wanted to be a journalist since I was 9 years old, you got to really care about this too. It seems to me. Now, there are a couple of different models. The Huffington Post became a kind of mass website, but that really kind of gathered together a more progressive, global community. People cared about politics, and they seem to have made a business out of that. I mean, in some ways they have big traffic, but their traffic is targeted at a certain kind of people. Millennials, people who are sort of tending toward the left, and that seems to sort of work for them. BuzzFeed is another example that's gotten a lot of attention. My 14-year-old daughter does all their quizzes. It's sort of captured that sort of rising generation. Their business model is, BuzzFeed to me is an advertising agency with a news arm attached. BuzzFeed makes all its money from native advertising, that they create advertising for companies. They don't even have a model for how to monetize their news. The news is simply a cost center, which they, like with Bloomberg, by the way, where Bloomberg makes all its money from selling terminals, selling data, and selling a messaging service, with a news department attached, which is also essentially a loss-making cost center if you were to break it out. But that's a model that clearly works for them. In Silicon Valley, there are a couple of successful new startups called The Information and Recode, and they've done very well by being kind of the must-read for people who are, in tech. If you're a startup entrepreneur, this is the sort of thing you have to read every day to know what's going on. Quartz is this really interesting website from the Atlantic, which is aimed at a kind of global business audience. They're purely advertising, but all their advertising is bespoke native advertising. So they basically kind of create advertising for big companies that run campaigns, and they say, well, we can give you a fairly, attractive audience, which is kind of global and well off that you're trying to reach. I want to come back to the New York Times briefly, and then go to something I know a bit better. The New York Times tried to play traffic bingo. They tried to sort of say, okay, we're gonna the paper still makes most of our profit. Online is purely a marketing device, and if we kind of just sort of really jack up those traffic numbers, we'll get money from advertising. It'll be those, this programmatic ads, display ads. If we say we've got, millions and millions and millions of eyeballs, that'll sort of generate enough revenue. Not actually quickly, it took years to have this realization there. That wasn't paying off. That even as your traffic numbers kept going up, the CRM, I don't know if you guys know what that is, it's basically kind of the sort of cost per view of a programmatic ad per unit, that kept going down. Basically what Google Ads was paying you for having someone see that ad was going down even faster than your traffic numbers could go up. So you're kind of standing still. In total, the digital advertising was not bringing nearly enough money to pay for a newsroom of 1,000 journalists, and a place that's really by culture committed to quality, being really, trying to be the best paper in America, and if you hear them, the world. A couple years ago, it was a really tough moment, but the CEO said, okay, we're putting in a paywall. The Guardian still can't bring itself to do this. They put in a paywall, and it was considered very risky. They have a metered paywall, you can see 10 articles until you have to subscribe. That's been the salvation of the New York Times. That basically, they've come to realize what a smart media exec told me about 15 years ago, that you can't rely on advertising anymore to pay for your journalism. You have to have your users pick up the bulk of the cost. People who enjoy your product pick up the cost for it. Now, if you're selling yogurt or cars, this is not a revelation, right? It costs X to make this car, you put a premium on to get a margin, and you put it out the door, and someone who really wants it pays for it. Well, we were putting out things that were actually very expensive to make for free. Take it. And we kind of got people used to not paying for it. The Times, it took a little while, but people have now, basically, you show your loyalty to the New York Times. You can have a much better user experience by being a subscriber. And those numbers have jumped up steadily. They had really quite an incredible quarter, partly thanks to Donald Trump, but I think it's been part of a kind of trend for a while. They had 308,000 new digital subscribers just in the first 3 months of this year. And those people are each paying, I think, between $100 and $200 per year. That's a lot of money. And if that's a kind of trend that keeps going up, they're on track to have digital subscriptions cover the bulk of the cost of their journalism. They know what they're offering, they know who they're offering it to globally, but primarily in the US. Kind of East Coast educated product for smart, center, leftish leaning consumer. Now that number came out the same day that their print revenue numbers came down 18%. I'm sure that sounds familiar to anyone here who's in the newspaper business. Digital advertising is up 18% too, but it's much smaller, so overall revenues up 5%. Their stocks are up 30%. So shifting this cost to the consumer was the key to, basically, it sort of turned the New York Times from a place that I would say was on suicide watch, all my friends there, to being a place that actually feels quite positive about the future. Because, subscribers are showing you they like what you're producing. They're willing to pay for the cost of what they're consuming. And that's really, I think that's been the key to sort of their turnaround. Now, I want to spend maybe 10 minutes on a case study which I know well, which is my own. Part of it, it's a bit self-serving, but it's also, I really do want to use it as a case study. And like any kind of new media startup, I will go to a PowerPoint. Pro tip to all of you, PowerPoint's something that I sort of discovered as I took this job. Let's see. So this is, let's walk you through our business here in Europe. We launched in Europe in 2005. And we made a lot of noise, especially in Brussels. But I was going to show you this sort of a video that we used at our launch party, which was in April of 2005. 2015, sorry. After you get beyond 40, it all seems kind of to blend together.
We don't focus on the masses. We focus exclusively on an elite audience. That said, we let Kim Kardashian in our cable.
And then I need Mike to start wearing pants to the White House briefing.
I refuse to wear pants until the president gives us more access.
Just do as I say, and Politico gets a Kardashian.
According to Politico.
Politico today.
Politico reported. The front page of Politico.
It's linked on Linguist this morning.
Everyone go to Politico.com.
Well done, Politico.
It's a magazine, right? Are you from Politico?
I think there's no doubt that what Belgium needs is a version of Politico.
I'm Carrie Rudolph Brown. I'm the surrogate of senior editor.
The Politico 2015 is about 5 times bigger than the Politico that we started with 8 years ago. We linked up with the German publishing house, Axel Springer. That was going to be an unbeatable combination.
I think Politico really has the opportunity to be the leading platform for political debates in and about Europe.
Europe is a huge global player and is undercovered. It needs daily coverage of the players. It needs daily coverage of the politics. It needs daily coverage of the policy.
Politico will be definitely a global brand, and no one interested in policy or politics would be around without reading Politico.
We want to really connect the dots between these power centers. What is behind the story in Europe?
Quality, journalistic quality is of the essence, and that means independent journalism, that means intelligent journalism, that means critical journalism.
Politico has proven that digital journalism and quality journalism go very well together.
People are going to have to read Politico because we're driving the conversation on subjects that matter to them. And I think they'll want to read Politico because it's fun to read.
Will you read Politico?
Of course I would if you send me a copy.
It's actually on the internet.
I'm so sorry.
Okay, so that's a bit of propaganda for you. I hope you don't mind. It's also, we were new to the Brussels market, and as in the US, we took a bit of a risk by kind of having the bluster come before the substance. And I can, let me make sure. Here's Emmanuel Macron at our event last year. So showing the impact a year later. Of course, we knew all along he would be president. So there you go. Okay, that was completely unintentional, but we basically were trying to. When we came to Europe, we didn't have a brand here. Like in the U.S., we were starting from nothing, but we like a lot of internet companies, we were trying to say, here's our vision for what we want to do. Here's the theory for our case for why this market needs this publication, and then you kind of set the ambition, and then you try and meet it. For us, the key was to meet it journalistically, obviously. There's a few slides here. I'll just kind of walk you through quickly. They were done. Some of them were done by our marketing department, so pardon the sort of marketing speak. But we set out to be the must-read. We're going to dominate the conversation. This is Okay, it's a bit sort of American sort of, and in Brussels, people are like, oh no, how are they going to do that? But I think you're stealing my mojo. Okay, there you go. All right. We said, the FT, where I started out in my modest career, was, the paper in Brussels. Like, no, we're going to push them aside. Like, okay, we are. But we have actually made very quickly on, because we went to a space that was not, that was fairly open. We went in there with a lot of people and said, okay, we're going to sort of try and bring the story to life for the people there. And sort of early on, it seemed to hit. Some stories were passed around. Everyone was talking about it. Jean-Claude Juncker was complaining about it all the time. He was calling us peep show style journalism. Martin Selmayr, I don't know how many of you know who he is. Everyone knows who Martin Selmayr is now. He was tweeting that we were kind of a tabloid rag, and I was like, we must be doing something right, because people they're definitely reading. They're not saying they love it, but they're definitely reading. So, and then one of our sort of first kind of very scientific signals that it was working was a sort of a survey of top parliamentarians, people in the commission, that this thing is really having an impact there. So we've grown from we hit 1 million unique, and I was telling you, don't mind traffic. Slight amendation, if traffic is 0, that's not good, right? So and so you do want to see kind of readership grow, and we hit about 1 million unique visitors our third month in, which is actually the same time where the U.S. site, granted 10 years before, hit that benchmark. We're about 5 million page views per month, and it's sort of a kind of steady increase. We're getting new readers. That's very important to us. But what's even more important is we're getting the right readers. We want to make sure that we don't care how many people are coming to our publication, but if we're going to be the publication that's a must-read for people in politics and in policy and in business who want to know about politics and policy, the right people have to be coming to our site. The UK became our biggest market in June 2016. It was kind of ironic with the Brexit vote, and it stayed that way. And what's that we really kind of first focused on getting that kind of core EU market, core EU audience, but then the UK suddenly needs a lot of information about this weird place called Brussels, which they've decided to leave, and that's been kind of a really exciting opening for us into London that we're really pushing forward this year. We're now 70 people. We started about 30 journalists, so we're 70 and we're continuing to grow. We're very made sure from the start that we'd not be an Anglo-American venture, that we were trying to sort of really be part of the furniture, let's say in Brussels or Paris, I hope soon in Madrid, and that we wanted to sort of really hire continental Europeans to cover continental Europe. We have a fairly English staff in London, but the majority of our reporters are non-native English speakers. And so we're in those cities, and we're trying to connect those cities. And I added on Washington and New York. There's a sort of transatlantic bridge, given our strength in the US, that we're trying to sort of make happen. So Politico was one of the earliest ones to really to discover, big discovery, that one of the most effective ways to reach people is by email. And people actually consume news. You send them by email. They on their phone or on their computer, they open it. And so we started in the US with something called Playbook, which was a free newsletter that was emailed every morning at 7 a.m. And that's grown out to be about 120,000 people who subscribe to it. A lot of publications now do free newsletters, but we still find it to be a great way that, unlike the newspaper where all of yesterday's news today, we want to start fresh. We start fresh with an email in the morning that sort of can summarize what happened the day before, but really try and push the story forward. Here's what you got to look out for today, whether you're in Brussels, on the Brexit story, and some of the other ones are UK products, and then Morgen Europa is our German language newsletter. That you start your relationship with us at 7 a.m., and hopefully you end it at midnight, where we push you emails or we push you stories from the website. We do many things, and we have a sort of a mix. Now, I'll talk briefly about the business, which is what I really wanted to sort of try and get across here, that we have multiple editorial products. Obviously, the website, politico.eu, is our front porch, but we have a very big events business, live events. People like, in the digital age, to actually come together like we are here and meet, live and have conversations. We have something called the Pro News Service, which is a subscription. It's essentially half of our journalism you don't see. And the way the Pro works, I can talk about it a little bit more if people are interested. It is we create something called verticals, where we cover policy areas in great depth. We cover technology, energy, healthcare. Now we have transport, financial services. Someone's going to kill me if they saw it. We have seven in all, and people subscribe. Companies subscribe to them, and they're not for individual subscribers. They cost around 8,000 euros per year for 5 users at companies. But there you get really in-depth coverage of sort of policy issues, mostly at the E level. Obviously, do podcasts, do a lot of live blogs. Last year, we started doing. We used the Apple Wallet in a very innovative way to ahead of the Brexit referendum in the UK, where people were sort of getting push notifications via their Apple Wallet. And it was the first time the Apple Wallet was ever used by a media company to distribute news. So there are many different ways you can tell people what's going on. And our promise is we tell people things they didn't know that are highly relevant to their professional lives. Briefly, we have something called the Ryan Heath's Brussels Playbook. If you're not a subscriber, it is free. If you're interested in European affairs, I highly recommend it. But the point of Playbook is now has over 60,000 subscribers. It's a one-person newspaper, is another way to think about it, with one-person costs conveniently. But the key thing about it is who reads it. So everyone in Juncker's office, pretty much, virtually all the commissioners get it into their mailboxes directly, people in Parliament, and that's our key, that we don't care about the mass audience number, but we care deeply about the audience, and having a focus on who we are for, tying that to the kind of journalism we do, and tying that in turn to the business model is how we approach this. So this is our Pro offering. Again, it's up to 550 organizations. So these are not big numbers. 550 is not a big number until you can consider that each one is, signing a contract in the 5 digits. So it's very popular. I mistrade, I think, when I sort of went through the 7. These are the sort of 7 areas we cover. This is our sort of business that and Pro, we just started in 2015 at the very end. So it's a brand new business, and it's something which is kind of steady but stable. That unlike advertising, advertiser could love what they're doing with you, but the next year their budget changes or their priorities change, they may go somewhere else. A Pro subscription is something which is renewable. People can sign for 2 years. We have a very good sense. And the beauty of it, too, we have very close contact with our subscribers. It actually takes a pretty big sales team to make it work. But it means that we know how much revenue is coming in, which makes it possible for us to hire journalists, which is really my selfish goal in my professional life. And that's something that we hope by 2019 will be pretty much half our business. And we think that the professional services for us is the key to both the sustainability and the stability of Politico as a publication. Summing up, so I think every publication needs a kind of clear mission statement. Who are you for? What are you doing? Why? For us, it's politics and politics coverage for those the professional need to know. Full stop. Our success really does depend on thinking of our audience as kind of distinct communities. I always think that I should be able, if I had a day free, to sit down and figure out everyone in the 20, let's say, that's too many, 28. Let's say the 5 main EU countries, Spain of course included, who should be one of our regular readers. I can figure it out from my head, from my own contact book, by the jobs they have, President Rajoy's European advisor, the foreign minister, people at top companies who cover European government affairs. That's our community. The community is There are many communities. There's a sort of Brussels kind of Beltway community, there's a tech policy community, there's a Westminster bubble community, some of them overlap. But we want to engage with those people directly. And this is the one big difference for me as a journalist. Before, I wrote columns for the Wall Street Journal. I was speaking from on high. This is the way it is. I don't really want to hear from you. You know, I was sort of engaged a little bit in kind of, Twitter fights, but it was not. We very much want to have this almost personal relationship with readers. It can be virtual, obviously, through our emails and our website, but it can also be, we do a lot of events, we do parties, and what we really try and do is throwing a kind of cool party where we invite interesting people in. The mixed revenue model, we have basically three things, which is subscriptions, events, advertising, not dependent on any one of those three. Ideally, they're all fairly equal. Your editorial model is your business model, and your business model is your editorial model. They have to seamlessly fit together. It doesn't mean the people on the business side say, hey, you got to be nice to so-and-so because we're trying to sell them an ad. That would be death for any publication, especially ours. But it means that you really think hard about what you're trying to do and how you're going to make it work as a business. Always innovate. It's in the media business, it's the most competitive sector that I can see out there. Maybe tech is similar, but media, unfortunately, we're also part of the sort of tech sector now. If you're not moving, if you're not always thinking, how can we do this better? How can we find new ways to make this work? Complacency is the death of media. It's a line that my boss has used with me many times, so I'm sharing with you. If you're complacent about where you are, you're going to get eaten up very, very fast. And last thing is the early lessons that I've learned from this. In the US, we had this sort of saying, going to flood the zone, and we're going to sort of win the morning. Basically, we're going to be the must-read for the morning, for the audience we care about, and we're going to be, for the things that we choose to do, we're going to be better than anyone else. That works here, too. There's a lot of skepticism in Brussels, like, this kind of weird German-American thing, how's it going to, many have tried to make this thing interesting in the EU level. That works in Brussels. It seems to be working in London. And I think at least that's the approach to political journalism. But I think that's also true for business journalism or local journalism. You got to be a must-read for the people that you think are your core readers. If you're not a must-read for your core readers, I don't think you can really make this work. Be distinctive. You can't assume someone's going to read you like they read the sort of paper in the past. And even though you have the same story that 20 other papers had, they don't have the 20 other papers. Now, people on the phone, they have the 20 other stories. If you're repeating what other people have, you're wasting your readers' time. They're not going to come back to you. I think we always try and say, every story we do, like, what original element do we have? Scoops, that's the main thing we try and do. But there's many different ways to be original. You have an original insight. You have an original interview. You have an original take on something. Putting points on the board, make sure your journalism gets noticed. Make sure people notice that your journalism is getting noticed. That's part of a bit of sort of self-promotion, but I think in this digital world, you have to really speak up for yourself and your brand. And you have to have something behind the bullshit, to be, pardon the expression. If you don't have the substance, then you're going to be exposed pretty fast. We decided, don't take the big national players on head on. We're not going to beat the New York Times at its own game. We're not going to be Bloomberg at their game. We can only do what we can do well. Frequency matters. That just means that show that you're committed to a certain story. So if you want to understand what's going on in Brussels, you should be thinking, and I hope you are, I got to read Politico. If you care about Real Madrid, you should be probably thinking about a different site. But there should be one site, and there should be one site which should sort of have a claim, like, we're going to tell you, like, what's really going on in that locker room. What did Zidane really say? That is how you turn people into addicts, which is one of the other metaphors we've always used. Reasons for sharing are always the same. People share stories for same reasons in America, in Europe, in Spain, in France, in Belgium, because they're interesting to them and they think they're going to be interesting to their friends. And the one metric I do keep an eye on is the Facebook shares. When things do well on Facebook, that's a really good sign that people feel that this story is interesting enough to share with their community because it sort of speaks to them. And I've repeated the last two, but in this media climate, journalists can't think that they're working in a complete remove from business. It doesn't mean that journalists should be selling ads. It doesn't mean journalists should be thinking about or second-guessing themselves about what kind of journalism they should be doing to make the business work. That they should have kind of clear direction from their editorial leaders about, here's the mission for our publication, here is what we got to do this work, and that editorial leadership has to work hand in hand with the business leadership on a strategy that makes sense both for business and the editorial side. We're not in the day anymore where you have a monopoly of on the distribution of information, and you can do kind of the journalism that you want, and you just have ads appear next to it, and you don't care why they're sold or who they're sold to. And last thing is, you just can't do everything. I think this is back to the point about being a niche player. We're all niche players. The FT thinks that it's a niche player. I mean, they're basically a niche player for kind of global financial, political elite. They don't care that much about unique views. They care about, having people subscribe to their website. They care about having the right readers. I think that's the same thing that we do too. That again, I say, we can't do everything, but the few things that we choose to do, we got to aim to do better than anyone else. Because in the digital world, it's such an ocean of content. There's so many things out there. So how do you stand out? How do you become something distinctive? By having a kind of clear focus on being better at that one thing than anyone else. That's it. I want to wrap it up here, but I really do want to have this be a two-way conversation. So thank you very much.
Bueno, me parece que ha sido una descripción muy realista de la situación del periodismo, pero al mismo tiempo muy optimista. Claramente el periodismo no está en crisis y el modelo que acaba de presentar, Político en Europa, parece que lo demuestra. Tenemos breves minutos, pero yo creo que sí que por lo menos 3 o 4 preguntas, si lo permiten los organizadores. Entonces, lo que vamos a hacer, veo que mucha gente no tiene traducción, con lo cual la conversación puede seguir en castellano o en inglés, como ustedes prefieren. La primera pregunta aquí y la segunda aquí.
Hola, buenos días. Quería preguntar si no corremos el riesgo de que aparezca otro monopolio y que todo quede en manos de un único periódico, que sea Google, o de dos, que sea Facebook, y que va a utilizar la información de todos los demás a los periodistas como meras corresponsalías.
Google and Facebook have monopoly, or near monopoly, which is actually, I think that's a problem, and not just selfishly, on mobile advertising. They are so dominant as a platform. They are not dominant as, they don't actually control the content. So you have this incredible pluralism on Google and Facebook, because there's all these publications out there. So I'm not suggesting that that Google and Facebook are sort of in some ways kind of really, they're a danger clearly they've sort of eaten our lunch in the media in terms of advertising, taking that away from us. But they're not, I think, and that's a problem because, but they would say that, we are all for pluralism in the media, and it's up to the media to figure out how to make their business work so our users can share these various articles. My point is not actually about that you should give up on advertising completely, but I think it's about having a kind of clear idea of what kind of advertising you could attract. We don't, partly because we're, even at 2.5 million uniques a month, we're not going to be a serious sort of, programmatic, we're not going to get virtually any money from the sort of traffic that comes. The advertising that we get, and we get a lot of advertising to our newsletters, is by working from companies who want to, from companies, agents, sort of NGOs, who basically use us as a vehicle for their lobbying. They want to get a certain kind of conversation going. They want to push a certain line into the public debate. So I do think there's still a way for advertising to make it work. But I think just be very realistic about Facebook and Google are just so big that it just means that media has to adjust to that reality.
Can you tell us a bit more about your experience with subscriptions in Europe versus the US? I guess it's tougher here. And secondly, related to that, have you considered other models for subscription membership beyond companies like paywall or other things?
So our subscription model is very different from the New York Times or the FT, which is actually not cheap, the FT. I sort of just got the bill and I couldn't believe how much I was paying for this. We don't have a consumer subscription business for the time being. The idea was always the site was free, the kind of political main, kind of the fireworks were sort of free, you know, the big political stories, and then we created Pro in 2011. So that was 4 years into the lifespan of Politico in the US, where they were looking sort of for new ways to make money, for ways to diversify their revenue streams. And the way that it was set up then, and it's still the way we set it up now, is that we thought it's a very labor-intensive thing, and people have tried to copy it, including my former employer, but haven't kind of figured it out. That what we create is fairly big teams. So our tech team, so our financial services team, for example, is 5 reporters and 1 editor, who are just working on financial services regulation at the European level. And most of what they do is not out, it's not even a paywall. It's like in this other world that you only get a key to if your company or your government agency subscribes to Pro. Then we have a very big sales team which works to identify potential, you know, all the banks, their lobbying arms, law firms, whoever might potentially be a client. And it's a very intensive sale. Like we get a 2-week free trial. You know, if we get a sale, we follow up regularly asking, hey, what do you think? Are you happy with it? What are you missing? Give us feedback, you know, and then that's passed on to the editorial side, try and make sure that we get renewals. That's really the key thing. The cost is prohibitive for consumers, and that's by design, but it also does, and we're not a profit-making enterprise yet, so clearly it's really has to kind of cover the salaries of the journalists. I think there is possibility. I mean, we're always thinking about kind of tweaking the model, and everyone should be thinking all the time about how you could do things differently. You know, a lot of things you sort of throw at the wall and they don't stick, but maybe something will stick that you haven't thought about before, and you're going to try it. But we haven't yet. You know, there's probably different. I mean, we do have one variety of. There's some deals involved. We can kind of buy all 7 at the same time. The European Commission has IP access to Pro, so they don't get the emails, but anyone who works in the Commission can log on their computer and get all the content. I just think it's. I mean, we see it as a product that's very valuable. So we wouldn't give it away for free because that would be deadly for our business. And I think having that approach to journalism is a fairly healthy one. And Pro is an extreme example of like having a very narrow idea of who your audience is, and providing them with and it is journalism. I mean, we formatted a bit differently. It's mostly done by newsletter format or really short sort of blurbs of, hey, this just happened, or like, here's a copy of a draft EU directive on solar panels that we got our hands on, and that's really interesting to, if you're a solar panel company, it's not that interesting to you, right? So it's, you know, it's really interesting to a very small number of people and not that interesting. So even if you actually put a lot of our Pro stuff on the main site, no one would really want to read it, and it would be not good for our business. So.
Hi, you just actually touched on my question, which was what future you see or what there can be for regional or local general interest media. I started my career at the Philadelphia Inquirer, which went the same way as the Baltimore Sun, the Miami Herald, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And what sort of business model do you see that would be possible, that would allow the coverage in these sort of regional markets in the way that you would get from a New York Times at the national level?
Right. Well, it seems to me, and this is sort of, I mean, in some ways, I see partly what we do as being kind of a village newspaper, you know, that we have, like I have an intimacy with our readers that I never really had before in my career. I see them at dinner parties, you know, in the streets, and it's that intimacy that makes me kind of quite excited about the potential for this because, you know, we can be the place that kind of gathers people, that really connects people. And if like smart local, I mean, you call it a publication or a club or a, you know, if you're the kind of gatherer and the primary root of that is maybe through information or part of it's through information, but part of it you throw like a potluck dinner or you throw like, or you sort of hold an event that's sponsored by your local grocery with the local kind of like novelist talking about their book. I think that there has to be sort of ways to figure out how to sort of use the fact that you have that kind of loyal and well-defined audience. But the key to me seems to me you have to kind of first define and capture that audience, whatever it happens to be, and then think not in the sort of traditional ways about how you monetize that. It's not really a perfect question, but I think sort of people who are sort of smarter than me obviously would sort of maybe kind of play around with that and find ways to become, sort of play the same role that the kind of community paper played in the past, but by using kind of this technology, by sort of, you know, also being nimble about how they think about, you know, how we pay for it. But coming back to the point, you know, primarily, I would think the Inquirer should, you know, have a high paywall, should, I'm sure it's trying to, sort of shift the cost of what it does to its consumers rather than, you know, relying on advertisers to pick it up. I mean, for us, honestly, advertising is the kind of layer on top. It's not something that we think can be a really dependable sort of base for our business. Doesn't mean we don't try and get it, doesn't mean we don't believe in it, but we do think subscribers are a very solid base, and then everything else can be built on top. You know, events, advertising, who knows what. You know, maybe we'll create some like political travel tours around Central Asia. You know, so.
Do you think that the Brexit will give you a big push against strong competitors? I guess the strongest in Europe is the Financial Times in English. And second question, are you considering any other language in Europe?
So Brexit, I remember my colleague in the US sort of emailed me the morning after, is this good or bad for us? And I said, you know, my reflex as a journalist is kind of chaos is always good. So, you know, in chaos, people are looking for sort of clarity, looking for information. We think for us, and this is sort of speaking just for Politico, it's a tremendous opportunity for us to really build this bridge into the UK from Europe. Because for the first time in Europe's, or in Britain's relationship with Europe, and there's so many paradoxes about the whole Brexit thing. One of them is like, you know, like Michel Barnier and Donald Tusk and Juncker are now sort of household names in, you know, Northern England. There's this thirst to understand what's happening in Brussels, both at the professional level, you know, companies are dying to know, government employees are dying to know, but across the sort of British population. And the last thing is, I think the sort of the EU will now impact the lives of, everyday lives of Britons for years to come in a way that it never did when they were in it, partly by sort of, you know, causing economic disruption, by, you know, meaning that they can't sort of, they have to sort of redo the whole British state. So we think that, you know, we have the biggest newsroom in Brussels by a long stretch. Xinhua, I'm told, has a bigger newsroom, but I've actually never seen a Xinhua journalist doing a journalistic function. We're also bigger than the entire, we're bigger on the continent than the entire British press corps, not counting Reuters, which is a Canadian newswire, I would say now. So we do see an opening. It's obviously the language helps, you know, that that we have this kind of, again, back to the point about comparative advantage, you know, like what is your comparative advantage? Figure it out, play to it, don't try and do things that other people can do better. So we can cover the Brexit negotiation, or we should be able to cover the Brexit talks better than anyone else, given the strengths we have in Brussels that are very, very deep, and with a pretty good team in London as well. Other languages, you know, we have, I was involved in 2 projects at the Journal when we had a joint venture with Handelsblatt where about 15 years ago we were translating Handelsblatt stories into English, our stories into German. Then the Wall Street Journal had even a German language website. The FT, as you may know, had a German language newspaper. None of it worked. Journalism does not translate very easily. And when you're getting a story in translation, you are getting it in translation, and people read it in a different way. And especially for us, I mean, especially if it's about immediacy, that sort of blocks it. But you're used to reading stories a certain way. My wife actually used to work for Le Monde, and I could never write the way that she writes for Le Monde. It's almost like she's written a kind of like a poem in the first paragraph. It was beautiful, but I was like, not the way that I was taught to, just tell people what's happening and like what it means. And so I'm a bit sort of, we come to it with some sense of sort of how hard it is. That said, we are exploring it. We think there may be we do have a German language newsletter, Morgen Europa, that's written from Brussels, and it's done really well. It's had one of our highest sort of subscription increases for any newsletter we've done, that reaches a German language audience that really cares about what's happening in Brussels. Apparently it's very good. Don't ask me, I don't speak German. We're thinking about maybe there's a way more with the professional services journalism we do, where you're sort of transmitting kind of more just information, and that can be translated fairly quickly, and there's a market for it. Where I am skeptical is it's just really hard to do a native language publication. It's been done. Newsweek has done a couple issues abroad that are better than the Newsweek in the States that folded eventually, and Poland still has one. But those have to be almost indigenous publications set up. If you do a Politico in Spain, well, there's some ways to do it maybe sort of with a bit of Spanish. But if you really wanted to do one here, you would say, okay, someone's got to invest in that. You're going to hire like 40 journalists. You're going to have, and the most important thing is you need the native language journalists because they have a feeling for the audience. And that's the other thing. I think it's not just about language, it's about sort of journalistic culture, and we're all kind of used to a certain way of doing things. For example, the Morgen Europa, which I know is really good, the German language, it's very different than our playbook, which is kind of, do any of you get playbook? Good. More of you should. It's it's kind of punchy and light and to the point. And Florian Eder, who writes the German one, said, actually, a German reader wants something which is more considered, more sort of elegant. So he writes things that are sort of longer, and it's written beautifully, apparently, and that really works well for those readers.
I have to confess I am hooked on Politico, especially the US version edition. And I am always amazed about the quality of the content. You keep writing, it's long, you are giving us context, background, analysis, and you keep writing 1,000 words, 2,000 words.
Not always 1,000 words. It should be short too. It should be.
Well, I am thinking about the Dan Rather's profile, the second coming of Dan Rather, that kind of thing. And I am amazed that you distribute all these things for free,
right,
on the internet. We have the idea that online journalists, free journalists online, is you pay nothing and you get almost nothing in exchange. So, again, how do you do it?
Right.
How long is going to last?
Yeah. Well, for us, again, I think we have always thought was we're trying to reach 1,000 people, let's say. We're about 1,000 people. If we can get those 1,000 people to have this addiction to the site, but it has to be the right 1,000 people. The chief of staff of the White House, Juncker's chief of staff. That takes serious journalism. It takes content that other people don't have. These are serious people. They're not going to take crap, right? They'll want something which will give them insights about what's going on, about their rivals. Someone that they really don't like, is getting this promotion. We should be telling them that first. But our feeling is that if we get those people to really be politicos, then we can build a business which is, I mentioned, an advertising business, but it's a different kind of advertising business in the sense that it is it's advertising as lobbying. That industry groups, companies pay a premium to reach those 1,000 people, give or take. They're not trying to reach the 30 million who also read that story. They're trying to reach those 1,000 people. With that access, we can put on events that are better, hopefully, than other people's events. We can get people on stage that other publications can't get on stage. We put it more in a more fun way. People then want to be associated with those events, so they sponsor. So we had a Playbook event last week where Ryan Heath interviewed Martin Selmayr. No, Florian actually interviewed Martin Selmayr in German about his dinner date with Theresa May. That made news. It was a kind of something that you couldn't find somewhere else. So it really is built on around that. The Dan Rather piece, just incidentally, that came from our magazine. So we started a magazine in the U.S. What new things are you guys thinking up? Well, we're going to do this kind of glossy magazine that we put out once every 2 months, mostly put it out online. Those magazine stories have been very good for us in terms of sort of broadening our audience, still a quality audience that makes it easier for us to sell a certain kind of advertising.
The 1,000 people pay the premium?
No, they're just people that we can tell you, with Ryan Heath's playbook, I saw that sort of sign, these people subscribe to this email list. I can't tell you whether we know what they open or what they click on. We might, that is what an advertiser finds attractive. And last thing I would say, so when Mike Allen, I heard this story all the time, so when Mike Allen started the Playbook in Washington, he initially had 5,000 subscribers, pretty fast. Now it's about 120,000. He was as influential with 5,000 as he was at 120,000. So it's really about people who are at the heart. And if you're saying, you come to us to know what the conversation is between powerful people, a lot of people will want to know, will want in on the conversation, or think they're part of the 1,000, even if we don't think of them as being part of the 1,000. So that, that audience sort of grows very, very, very naturally. But our sales pitch is really about having, captured that group of people.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm going to stop the conversation here.
Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you very much for your stimulating view of the profession, as well as the interesting insight of the Politico's role in the European Union. Thank you also for this thought-provoking talk, and probably you have won several subscribers for Politico.
I hope so.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks very much.